Dustwood had seen bar brawls, bank robberies, and even a preacher ride through town naked on a dare. But nothing prepared them for the day as 6-foot Apache Cowgirl dragged 4 grooms to the altar. What happened next? Well, it made history. Chapter 1. The Shotgun Bride of Dustwood. Dustwood, Arizona Territory, 1884. A place so dry. The cacti begged for whiskey, and even the ghosts carried canteens. Tumbleweeds held regular meetings in the dusty streets, and gossip traveled faster than the Pony Express with a fresh set of horses. In the middle of this sun-baked town stood a saloon with swinging doors that hadn't swung closed since the Civil War, a sheriff's office that doubled as a church on Sundays, and a post office that delivered mostly poker debts and regrets. And towering above it all, both literally and figuratively, was Josie Willowhawk. Josie wasn't just tall. She was a mountain in a dress, 6'2", barefoot, broad-shouldered with arms that could carry a calf, and a heart that didn't flinch at bullets. Half-Apache, half-Scots-Irish, and wholly unpredictable, Josie was raised between a warrior's code and a moonshine still. Her father was a trapper who once taught a bear to dance, and her mother was a healer who could scare the fever out of a man with just one glare. By the time she turned 30, Josie had wrangled wild stallions, beat the notorious One-Eyed Louie in arm wrestling, and shot a rattlesnake clean through the eye at 50 yards. But nothing, not even the time she got drunk and accidentally deputized a mule, prepared the town for what happened one blazing Tuesday morning in August. Because that morning, Josie stepped out of the Dustwood and wearing a snow-white wedding dress with silver conchos sewn into the hem and spurred boots that clinked like a death sentence. Behind her, roped together like cattle headed for branding, were 4 men, 4 grooms, 4 different faces, each a mixture of confusion, panic, and misplaced hope. She held a shotgun over one shoulder and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. And by the time the church bell rang, the whole town had gathered. Bets were flying, and Widow Jenkins was selling lemonade laced with brandy at 5 cents a cup. The grooms. One, Reverend McAllister, a preacher with eyes too kind and a past too checkered. Some say he'd once been a riverboat gambler before God found him. Others say he still played cards in the back of the chapel with the church funds. 2, Cletus Boone, the town's wealthiest bachelor, thanks to striking gold and being too dumb to notice when folks stole half of it. He had teeth like piano keys and a laugh like a cow giving birth. 3, Deputy Hank Langley, loyal, law-abiding, and hopelessly in love with Josie since the day she knocked out a drunk miner with a frying pan. He followed her like a loyal hound, even when he knew better. 4, Joaquín Reyes, a wanted man, with a bounty on his head and poetry in his mouth. Josie had saved him from a lynch mob 5 years ago. Since then, he'd written her love letters in Spanish, words she couldn't read but kept anyway. No one knew how she'd done it. No one dared ask. Dustwood was used to Josie's oddities, like the time she set up a kissing booth to raise money for the schoolhouse, or when she lassoed the mayor during a town hall to make a point. But 4 weddings in one day? It was lunacy. It was chaos. It was Josie. The Church of Dustwood hadn't seen this much excitement since the piano caught fire during Sister Bernice's funeral. Inside, Pastor Harper stood nervously at the altar, looking at the 4 grooms and one bride with eyes like a cornered possum. "Which one are we marrying first, Josie?" He croaked, sweat pooling in his clerical collar. Josie tilted her head and smiled sweetly. "Whoever faints first will skip. Makes it easier." The crowd roared. One by one, she dragged each man up the aisle. The ceremony began, then paused, then restarted as another groom tried to make a run for it. Joaquín spoke only in Spanish. Deputy Hank muttered apologies. Reverend McAllister prayed, loudly. Cletus tried to pay her to elope with just him. Just as Pastor Harper said, "Dearly beloved," the doors to the church exploded open. Smoke, yelling, gunfire. Dustwood's rival outlaw gang, the Silver Spurs, had arrived, gunning for Joaquín Reyes. People screamed. Chairs overturned. The widow Jenkins hid behind the organ. "Josie?" She handed her bouquet to Deputy Hank and pulled a pistol from her garter. "Y'all don't ruin my wedding day," she growled, leveling the revolver at the gang leader's forehead. 5 minutes later, The gang was hogtied in the churchyard. The piano was on fire again, and Cletus Boone had passed out after trying to wrestle a raccoon that wasn't actually part of the ceremony. And the wedding? Well, Josie married none of them that day. Instead, she tipped her hat, wiped soot from her cheeks, and rode off on her Mustang named Salvation, shouting, "Guess I'm keeping my options open, boys." The town never recovered, and the legend of the shotgun bride of Dustwood was just beginning. Chapter 2. The hangover, the horse chase, and the bounty hunter's proposal. Dustwood woke up the next morning with a collective headache, a singed piano, and a new town motto: don't ever try to wed Josie Willowhawk unless you got life insurance and a fast horse. The sun rose reluctantly, casting long gold shadows over empty whiskey bottles. Flower petals trampled into the dust, and one very confused reverend sleeping inside a baptismal tub. The church smelled like gunpowder and raccoon hair. Meanwhile, Josie Willowhawk was already 3 miles outside of town, riding bareback on Salvation, her Mustang, with her white wedding dress shredded into ribbons and a grin wide enough to shame a jack-o'-lantern. She wasn't running away. She was riding toward her next move, because during all the mayhem, somewhere between the bouquet toss and the shootout, Josie had caught wind of a bounty. Not just any bounty. The bounty, $10,000 in gold, dead or alive. The target? One-eyed Big Frankie Del Mar, train robber, dynamite artist, and lover of bad poetry. Last seen heading toward Widow's Bluff with a wagon full of explosives and no brakes. And rumor had it, he was traveling with a hostage, a big city bounty hunter named Delilah Grimm. Meanwhile, back in town, Deputy Hank Langley woke up underneath a pew with a black eye, a bruised ego, and Reverend McAllister spooning a hymn book. Cletus Boone had gone missing entirely, last seen arm wrestling a goat in nothing but suspenders. Joaquín Reyes, ever the poet, had composed a sonnet to Josie and pinned it to Mayor's door using a knife and a rose. Dustwood was still standing, but barely, as Hank limped toward the sheriff's office, hat crooked and heart heavier than a sack of horseshoes. He saw the flyer Josie had snatched off the board the night before. Wanted, Big Frankie Del Mar, $10,000. Known to travel with 24 sticks of dynamite and a pet parrot that curses in German. Hank didn't need more clues. Josie was bounty hunting again. And every time she bounty hunted, someone got shot, something blew up, and at least one poor fool proposed marriage. Widow's Bluff, high noon. Big Frankie's hideout was exactly what Josie expected. Dumb, loud, and halfway buried in bird droppings. He'd holed up in an abandoned stagecoach station on the edge of a cliff, with barrels of TNT stacked like wedding cakes. Josie peered through her spyglass and squinted. Sure enough, there was Delilah Grimm, glaring so hard she was about to melt her ropes. And Big Frankie, dancing on top of a table, waving a bottle of gin, and singing a sea shanty to his parrot, Klaus. Josie holstered her revolver and cracked her neck. Showtime. The chase. It began with a bang, literally. Josie shot the lock off the front gate, stomped through the door like a goddess of vengeance, and tossed a stick of smoldering sage on the floor. Big Frankie, she shouted, either surrender or say goodbye to your other eye. Frankie panicked. The parrot panicked. The dynamite panicked. Kaboom! Suddenly, the building was ablaze. Frankie was running, Josie was chasing, and Delilah Grimm, freed from her ropes by sheer rage, grabbed a shotgun and joined the chase. They galloped through the canyon, weaving through rocks and screaming goats. Josie rode like a devil with a deadline, her shotgun slung across her back and her shredded wedding dress flapping like victory. Frankie's wagon hit a rock. Dynamite spilled out. "Oops!" he shouted, just before an explosion sent his hat into the stratosphere. The bounty hunter's proposal. By sunset, Big Frankie was hogtied to a cactus, muttering love songs to his parrot, and Delilah Grimm was nursing a busted lip and sipping from Josie's whiskey flask. "You always this dramatic?" Delilah asked, spitting dust. Josie shrugged. "Only on Tuesdays." Delilah studied her for a long moment, then pulled something from her pocket. A silver ring, simple and elegant. "I know we just met, but you saved my life. And let's be honest, your chaos is my kind of church." Josie blinked. "Are you proposing?" I am. There was a long pause. Then Josie laughed so hard she nearly fell off her saddle. Make it to Sunday, she said, and we'll talk. Delilah tipped her hat. It's a date. Back in Dustwood, again. Deputy Hank, Cletus Boone, still shirtless, Joaquín Reyes, and Reverend McAllister stood in the center of town like rejected suitors at a love auction. Where'd she go this time? Hank asked. The telegraph line buzzed with a message from the next town over. Woman matching Josie Willowhawk's description, just arrested most wanted bandit in the territory. Wore a tattered wedding dress and rode a horse named Salvation. Told U.S. to send her fiancés her regards. The men groaned in unison. And Josie? She rode into the sunset with a rope in one hand and possibility in the other. The legend grew, and so did her list of ex-fiancés. Chapter 3. The Jailbreak, the Judge, and Josie's Secret Past. Dustwood hadn't slept right since the day Josie Willowhawk rode off from her quadruple, almost wedding with shotgun, a Mustang named Salvation, and 4 confused grooms wondering if they'd been spared or ejected. But the very next dawn, things got even stranger, which, in Dustwood, meant something downright biblical. It all began when Widow Jenkins burst into the sheriff's office, clutching a frying pan, shouting something about a ghost in striped pants breakdancing in the jail. Now, Dustwood had seen its fair share of nonsense, but a ghost in striped pants? Turned out it wasn't a ghost. It was Joaquín Reyes, still wearing his fancy wedding trousers, shimmying through the jail bars like an eel in church grease. And somehow, he was halfway out. Deputy Hank Langley stood dumbstruck, holding his morning coffee and blinking like he was still dreaming. What in the 7 sun-scorched sins are you doing, Joaquín? Joaquín, without missing a beat, flashed a grin. I am escaping. With elegance. You got shackles on your ankles. I do not need feet to dance, amigo. Suddenly, the back wall of the jail gave a thunderous crack, and a stallion, Josie's horse Salvation, crashed through like he was auditioning for a traveling rodeo circus. On his back, Josie herself, dressed in black duster, wide-brimmed hat, and twin pistols strapped tight. She looked like Judgment Day had grown legs and learned how to ride. She tossed a rope to Joaquín. Time to go. Deputy Hank fumbled for his gun, but only managed to spill hot coffee on himself. You can't just, Josie. He's a wanted man. Josie narrowed her eyes. He's my wanted man. And I aim to find out why the Silver Spurs want him so bad before Judge Thistle puts him in a noose. Behind her, Joaquín somersaulted out the last of the bars and leapt onto the back of Salvation. Josie followed in one clean swing. In seconds, they were gone, out the back door, hoofbeats fading into the mountains. Hank stared at the broken jail, and then at Widow Jenkins, who was already updating the betting ledger with odds on Josie's next crime. She scribbled something about arson and elopement in the same line. Meanwhile, in the town of Dead Cactus Ridge, Judge Horace Thistle, a man so old and dusty folks swore he coughed tumbleweeds, sat in his courthouse puffing on a peppermint stick and examining a telegram from Dustwood. Miss Josie Willowhawk has liberated a federal prisoner. Again. He sighed and muttered to his bailiff, I haven't seen this much defiance since my 4th wife ran off with a magician. Shall I issue another warrant? The bailiff asked. The judge leaned back, eyes twinkling. No, I'll issue an invitation. If Josie wants justice, let's give her a stage to perform on. And with that, he ordered the Dustwood Circuit Court to reopen, a place no one had set foot in since the Great Pie Trial of '76, where a man was nearly hanged for adding rhubarb to an apple pie. Back on the trail, somewhere near Cactus Gulch, Josie and Joaquín rode hard until the sun dipped low. They made camp under a crooked mesquite tree, and for the first time in years, they talked without bullets or yelling. Why'd they want you dead? She asked finally. Joaquín poked at the fire with a stick, the flames flickering in his tired eyes. Because I know something about the Silver Spurs, about their real leader. I thought it was Jedediah Black. Joaquín shook his head. Jedediah is a puppet. The real boss is someone in the government. Josie's jaw clenched. Say that again. He nodded. They used the Spurs to wipe out witnesses, steal land, silence towns like Dustwood. I was one of them Once. But I got out. I tried to turn witness. They killed the marshal who was helping me. Josie stared into fire. Her father had once whispered something like that, about corruption deeper than the mines under Tombstone. He was found dead a week later. So why tell me now? Because you're the only person I trust. And because I know who your mother really was. Silence. Josie froze. Don't you dare. Her name wasn't Willowhawk. She was the blood daughter of Geronimo's right-hand man. A spy. A rebel. That healer image? It was a front. Josie stood, fists clenched, breathing hard. You better be lying, Joaquín. You better. He didn't flinch. I have proof. In a saddlebag buried under the church back in Dustwood. That's why I went back. That's why they followed me. Josie paced like a cougar in a cage. If what he said was true, everything changed: her heritage, her past, her right to everything she ever thought was hers. And maybe that's why, as dawn broke the next morning, Josie turned salvation back toward Dustwood, whispering, "Let's wake some ghosts." Back in Dustwood, Deputy Hank had restored the jail, sobered up the grooms, and was doing paperwork with one hand and nursing a black eye with the other, courtesy of Widow Jenkins, who insisted he owed her $5 and a dance. He nearly dropped his pen when Josie and Joaquín rode back into town, straight through Main Street like nothing had happened. "I want a trial," Josie announced, pointing at Joaquín. "Before Judge Thistle. Full audience. Full truth. You want to testify against him?" Hank asked. Josie smirked. "I want to testify for him. And I want the real villains in that courtroom." "Which villains?" She smiled coldly. "The ones wearing badges." Chapter 4. The Trial of the Century and the Marshal's Widow. The Dustwood Circuit Court hadn't seen this much action since the scandal of the Great Pie Trial of '76, and folks were still debating whether rhubarb counted as treason. But today was bigger. Word spread like prairie fire. Josie Willowhawk was bringing an outlaw to trial, and not just any outlaw, Joaquín Reyes, the Silver Spur's own black sheep. By mid-morning, every saddle rack in town overflowed with horses. The balcony of Widow Jenkins' saloon sagged under the weight of gamblers, gossipers, and 3 preachers claiming moral authority over proceedings, one of whom was spotted betting against Josie. Inside, Judge Horace Thistle sat behind his scarred bench, gavel in hand, peppermint stick clamped between his teeth like a cigar. The man was so old his wrinkles had wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp enough to cut steel. "Court is now in session," he bellowed, nearly toppling backward in his chair. Case of the Territory of Arizona versus Joaquín Reyes, accused of robbery, jailbreak, and excessive charm under duress. The gallery laughed. Thistle's gavel slammed down. "We'll have order in this court, or I'll have y'all peeling potatoes for the cavalry until your grandkids are grown." The entrance no one expected. Josie strode in, boots echoing on the wood floor, eyes burning like she'd swallowed lightning for breakfast. Joaquín followed, wearing shackles but grinning like a man walking into a dance hall, not a noose. But the real shocker came next, a tall, veiled woman dressed in morning black, stepping from the shadows at the back of court. She moved with a kind of grace that made hardened cowpokes sit up straighter. Hank Langley whispered to Widow Jenkins. "Who's that?" "That," Jenkins replied, "is the marshal's widow, and if she's here, the truth's about to cut deep." Opening salvos, the prosecutor, Clayton Berryman, stood, tall, with a face like a hawk that hadn't eaten in weeks. He strutted to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man," he pointed dramatically at Joaquín, "is the devil's own sidekick. He rides with thieves. He burns good men's homes. And when caught, he slithered from justice with the help of this woman." He swung to Josie, whose reputation needs no introduction. Josie folded her arms. "Neither does yours, Berryman, but here we are." Laughter rippled through the court. Judge Thistle banged his gavel. "Miss Willowhawk, you'll have your turn. Try not to hang the prosecutor before I do. The widow speaks." When Josie's time came, she walked to front, took a deep breath, and nodded toward the veiled woman. "I call my first witness, the widow of Marshal Eli Turner." Gasps filled the room. Everyone knew the marshal's death had been pinned on a botched arrest, But no one dared question the official story. The widow removed her veil. Her eyes were red but sharp. "My husband was not killed by Joaquín Reyes," she said, voice steady. "He was killed by men wearing silver spur badges, and one man wearing a government badge." Berryman jumped to his feet. "Objection! Unfounded hearsay." Judge Thistle leaned forward. "Objection overruled. I've been hearing this rumor since before your mama stopped using a washboard. Let her talk." The widow continued, revealing that Eli Turner had been set to meet Joaquín with documents proving the Spurs were under orders from a U.S. land agent. She produced a folded, weathered letter from her handbag and handed it to Josie. Josie opened it, scanning quickly, her lips tightening. Then she read aloud. Orders to relocate, undesirable settlements for development, all claims to be erased, witnesses to be removed. The crowd erupted. The turn. Berryman tried to redirect, hammering Joaquín with questions, but every answer only made him look less like an outlaw and more like a whistleblower. Finally, Judge Thistle leaned back, tapping his gavel. "Seems to me this trial ain't about Joaquín Reyes. It's about the folks giving orders to the Silver Spurs. And I'll be damned if I'm going to hang the messenger while the snake's still coiled." He turned to the widow. "Ma'am, do you have the name of this land agent?" The widow's voice trembled, but her eyes blazed. "I do." She looked straight at the prosecutor's table. "Clayton Berryman." The courtroom went dead silent, save for the sound of Widow Jenkins whispering, "Well, butter my biscuits." Berryman's face drained of color. He reached for his satchel. Too late. Josie had already drawn her pistol and kicked the bag from his hand. Inside, stacks of deeds, maps marked with red X's, and a silver badge with U.S. Land Office engraved on it. Verdict and chaos. Judge Thistle didn't even hesitate. "Bailiff, arrest the prosecutor. Release Mr. Reyes. And someone get me another peppermint stick. This is shaping up to be a long day." The gallery exploded in noise as Berryman was dragged out. Outside, word spread faster than wildfire that the Silver Spurs orders came from the highest levels, and that Josie Willowhawk was at the heart of bringing it down. But as Joaquín stood beside her, free at last, he leaned in and murmured, "This isn't over, Josie. The man above Berryman, he's coming for us next." Josie's eyes narrowed. "Then we ride before he does." Chapter 5. The Ride to Nowhere and the Man with No Shadow. By dawn the next day, the streets of Dustwood were quieter than a graveyard at midnight. The trial was over, but the trouble it unearthed wasn't. Josie Willowhawk had packed her saddlebag with only the essentials. Extra ammo, her mother's turquoise necklace, a piece of jerky that could break a tooth if you weren't careful. Joaquín Reyes waited by the hitching post, one boot on the rail, looking like a man caught between freedom and a funeral. "You sure you want to ride with me?" he asked. Josie swung into the saddle. "I don't ride with men. I ride toward trouble. And right now you're where the trail points." The ride out, they left Dustwood under the kind of sky that promised heat before noon and hell before sundown. Their destination? Nowhere. Not a town, not a map mark, just a stretch of Arizona desert where the land turned red and the wind spoke in whispers. Rumor had it the man pulling Berryman's strings lived out there in an old mining camp-turned-fortress. Locals called him the man with no shadow. Legends on the wind. They rode for hours, silence broken only by the creak of saddles and the occasional coyote's yip. Around midday, they stopped under a mesquite tree. Josie took a swig from her canteen. "So tell me about this no-shadow fella." Joaquín shrugged. "Some say he's a ghost. Some say he's a government man who sold his soul for land and gold. All I know is, if you cross him, you vanish." Josie smirked. "Guess we're about to find out if I'm vanish-proof." The stranger on the ridge. As the sun bled into late afternoon, they spotted movement on a ridge ahead. A lone rider, tall in the saddle, his hat brim pulled low. The strange part? The light was behind him, but no shadow stretched across the ground. Josie felt her skin prickle. "That him?" Joaquín's jaw tightened. "Yeah, and he's early." The rider didn't move until they were almost within shouting distance. Then his voice carried across the canyon, like a whip crack. "Josie Willowhawk, Joaquín Reyes, you've been making noise in my territory. A deal with the devil." They reined in, dust swirling between them. Josie called back, "If your territory includes lying, stealing, and hanging good men, then yeah, I've been making noise." The man tilted his head as if amused. "You think the truth will save you? I think my aim will." Josie's hand hovered near her coat, but the stranger didn't reach for a gun. Instead, he tossed something small into the dirt between them. A silver badge, same as the one found in Berryman's bag. "Ride home, Willowhawk," he said. "Take this as a gift. Or keep riding, and I'll take everything you love before the next full moon." The decision. For a long moment, only the wind moved. Joaquín looked at her, eyes flicking with unspoken warning. Josie nudged her horse forward, picking up the badge. She turned it in her hand. It bore the engraving U.S. Land Office, but the back was scratched with 3 words. "Ride to nowhere." She looked up at the stranger. "See you there." The man with no shadow smiled, a slow, cold curl of lips. "I was hoping you'd say that." And just like that, he spurred his horse and vanished into canyon, leaving no dust, no hoof prints, nothing. Nightfall in the red desert. They made camp under a sky so full of stars it looked like spilled sugar. Neither slept much. Every crack of brush, every shift of the wind, felt like the start of something. Joaquín finally broke the silence. "You just told the most dangerous man in Arizona that you'll meet him on his own ground." Josie lay back, staring at the stars. "Yep. And you're not scared?" "I'm terrified," she said with a grin. "But scared people make fewer mistakes." Keeps the hand steady. By morning, the trail ahead was nothing but red rock and the whisper of trouble waiting over the horizon, and Josie Willowhawk was riding straight into it. Chapter 6. Blood on the Red Rocks. By the time Josie Willowhawk and Joaquín Reyes reached the jagged canyons locals called the Devil's Teeth, the morning sun was already high enough to turn the rock walls into red-hot iron. The place got its name for a reason. Each spire and cliff looked like it could bite clean through a man and spit out the bones. Josie dismounted, tying her horse to a twisted juniper. "This is where folks vanish." Joaquín nodded grimly. "If you're lucky, they just vanish. If you're not," he didn't finish the sentence. The first blood. They hadn't been on foot more than 10 minutes when the first shot rang out. A bullet slammed into the rock above Josie's head, spraying red dust into her hat brim. Josie dropped to one knee, Colt in hand. "Friendly neighborhood welcoming committee?" Joaquín pointed to a shadow moving along the ridge. "Sniper." Josie's answer was 3 quick shots in the shadow's direction, each one ricocheting off stone. Somewhere above was one echo, followed by the clatter of a rifle falling. Canyon ambush. They moved fast, weaving through boulders, the heat pressing in like a furnace. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and juniper. That's when they heard it, a slow, deliberate clap. From between 2 spires stepped a man with no shadow himself, flanked by 2 gunmen with a dead-eyed look of men who'd already buried too many people. "You made it," he said, smiling as if they were old friends meeting at Sunday supper. "And you brought company." Josie's eyes narrowed. "We came for answers." "You'll get them," the man replied, "if you can live long enough to hear them." The standoff. The wind picked up, swirling red dust between them. Joaquín's fingers twitched near his revolver, but Josie stepped forward. "You sent Berryman to hang an innocent man," she said. "You tried to scare me off. Now you've got about 10 seconds before I find out if your legend bleeds." The man's smile never wavered. "Everyone bleeds, Miss Willowhawk. Some just bleed slower. Guns and betrayals." The first gunman lunged. Josie's Colt barked once. He dropped, clutching his shoulder. Joaquín took down the second with a shot that sent the man sprawling into a cactus. The man with no shadow didn't flinch. He just stepped backward toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Josie raised her gun, but before she could fire, a bullet hissed past her ear from behind. She spun and saw Marshal Boone's widow, dressed in riding leathers, rifle in hand. Josie shot past with only a heartbeat, but it was long enough for the man with no shadow to vanish into the crevice. The widow's warning. "You're chasing a ghost," The widow said, lowering her rifle. Josie's voice was ice. "You're riding with him?" "I'm surviving," the widow answered. "And if you want to do the same, you'll turn around right now." Joaquín glanced between them. Why help him? The widow's eyes hardened. "Because I know what happens to the people he decides to destroy, and I'm not ready to be one of them." The blood trail. Josie holstered her gun, but her mind was already racing. "If you won't stop him, I will." The widow sighed. "Then follow the blood trail. He's leaving you. But remember, he wants you to." And just like that, she mounted her horse and rode away, leaving Josie and Joaquín standing in the swirling dust. The only sound the slow drip of blood on red rock from the gunman Josie had winged earlier. Night in the Devil's Teeth. They made camp in a narrow canyon, the firelight throwing jagged shadows across the stone. Every flicker looked like the man with no shadows stepping out of the dark. Joaquín poked the fire. "You believe her? That he's leading us somewhere on purpose?" Josie stared into the flames. "I don't care where he's leading me, so long as I get there before he disappears again." Somewhere in the distance, a single coyote howl split the night, and Josie knew this hunt wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. Chapter 7. Ghost Town Poker in a Coffin Full of Dynamite. The ghost town of Dead Crow Gulch had been abandoned for over a decade. At least, that's what the faded hand-painted sign claimed. In truth, the town wasn't empty. It was the kind of place where shadows move without wind, and where deals were struck that never made it into the history books. That's exactly why Josie Willowhawk rode in just before sunset, dust cloud trailing, Joaquín Reyes at her side, with a coffin strapped to a mule behind them. The coffin. "Tell me again why we're dragging a coffin through Apache country?" Joaquín asked, spitting out a mouthful of trail dust. Josie smirked. "Because nothing makes a man more curious than something he's been told to stay away from." "Or more nervous," Joaquín muttered. "And I'm both." The coffin was long, heavy, and stamped with the initials MNS burned into the lid, the man with no shadow's own mark. Josie had borrowed it from a storage shed outside Prescott, and she intended to make sure word got around that it was headed for Dead Crow Gulch. The saloon. They tied their horses outside the Dry Bone Saloon, the only building in town with a roof that wasn't caving in. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke, whiskey fumes, and the low murmur of card games. At the center table sat 5 men, all hard-eyed, all dangerous, playing poker. One seat was empty. Josie took it without asking. "Buy in?" she asked, tossing a small pouch of coins on the table. One of the men, a wiry old-timer with a scar down his cheek, nodded toward Joaquín. "Your friend gonna watch her play?" "He watches," Josie said. "I's never leaving the deck. And sometimes he shoots." The dealer chuckled and dealt the first hand. "The bait." As the cards were played, Josie talked. Not about herself, but about the coffin. How it wasn't full of a body. How it was worth more than every man in the saloon combined. How it was headed to someone who would kill to keep it. By the second hand, men were whispering. By the third, one slipped quietly out the back door. Josie's plan was working. Word would reach the man with no shadow before nightfall. An uninvited player. Midway through the fourth hand, the saloon doors creaked open and a tall man stepped in. Duster coat, wide-brimmed hat, the whole frontier menace look. But what caught Josie's attention was his hands, pale, scarless, and far too clean for a man who claimed to work cattle. He took the last seat at the table, dropped a gold coin in the pot, and smiled without showing his teeth. "You're playing my hand, Miss Willowhawk," he said softly. Josie's fingers brushed the butt of her coat. "Then you're already losing." The turn. The cards kept falling, but the tension was thicker than the smoke. Outside, hoofbeats thundered, stopping just beyond the saloon. The stranger tossed his cards down, a perfect hand, and stood. "I believe you've got something that belongs to me." Josie smiled. "You mean this?" She tossed a playing card on the table, the ace of spades, with the words "look inside" scrawled across it. Boom! The first scream came from the mule tethered outside. The second was the muffled thump of an explosion. The coffin, the one stamped with MNS, erupted in a shower of splinters and red dust, sending the mule bolting down Main Street. Inside, the saloon went silent. Josie stood, brushed the dust off her hat, and looked the stranger dead in the eye. Tell your boss I'm done following him. Next time, I'm leading him. The escape. The stranger reached for his gun, but Joaquín was faster. His shot punched to the man's shoulder, spinning him into a table. Josie didn't wait for the others to react. She shoved through the batwing doors, mounted her horse, and tore down the street with Joaquín at her side. Behind them, the saloon erupted in chaos, and somewhere far away, Josie imagined a man with no shadow smiling in the dark. Because now, they were playing the same game. Chapter 8. The Widow's Ride and the Bullet Ledger. The desert outside Dead Crow Gulch was painted gold by the sinking sun, the air buzzing with heat and danger. Josie Willowhawk's horse pounded the earth in a hard gallop, Joaquín riding close enough to cover her flank. They didn't stop until the mountain swallowed the horizon, and the trail forked toward a narrow canyon. That's where they saw her. The marshal's widow. The widow appears. Her name was Clarabelle Thatcher, and she rode a pale gray mare like she was born in the saddle. Black veil fluttering, Winchester slung across her back. She didn't so much as flinch when Josie leveled her Colt. "Afternoon, Josie," Clarabelle called, voice smooth as molasses. "Last I saw you, you were watching my husband's funeral." Josie said flatly. Clarabelle's lips twitched. "Last I saw you, you were chasing ghosts." The ledger. From her saddlebag, Clarabelle pulled out a small black book bound in worn leather. She tossed it to Josie without slowing her horse. Josie caught it, one hand on the reins, and flipped it open. Inside were names. Dozens of them, some crossed out in red ink. Beside each name, a number, and next to that, a single small bullet symbol. Joaquín leaned over to peek. "This ain't no prayer list." "It's a death ledger," Josie said, and the handwriting familiar. The twist, every name belonged to someone who'd vanished in the last 10 years. Ranchers, lawmen, miners, and a few notorious outlaws. Some of them Josie knew personally. At the top of the list was her father's name. The bullet beside it was circled twice. Josie's voice hardened. "Where'd you get this?" Clarabelle's gaze never left the trail ahead. "From your friend, the one you think you're chasing. You're saying the man with no shadow gave you this?" "No," Clarabelle said. "I'm saying I work for him." The widow's story. As they rode through the canyon, Clarabelle told it like she was reading from the good book. Her late husband, Marshal Thatcher, had been the only lawman stubborn enough to keep chasing a man with no shadow. But when he got too close, the widow claimed, Josie's quarry offered her a deal, her husband's life in exchange for her loyalty. Clarabelle took it. And the marshal died anyway. "What did you do after that?" Josie asked. "I started keeping records," Clarabelle said. "Every job, every target, every name. Waiting for the day I could pass it to someone mean enough to burn him down." The catch. Josie didn't trust her. Couldn't. Clarabelle had betrayed her own husband. Maybe even more than she was admitting. But that ledger was gold, and every name in it was a piece of the man with no shadows puzzle. Before Josie could press further, Joaquín reined in hard. Riders. Fast ones. They turned to see 3 figures closing in, rifles raised. Josie stuffed the ledger into her vest. "Time to earn your keep, widow." The ride. The canyon narrowed. The walls towering high. The sound of hooves echoing like thunder. Clarabelle kicked her mare forward, rifle in hand, Josie and Joaquín flanking her. Bullets sparked off rock. Josie fired back, winging one rider and sending him tumbling from the saddle. Joaquín's pistol barked twice more, dropping another. The third rider didn't falter, didn't even blink. And when he got close enough, Josie saw why. It wasn't a man at all. It was a boy, no older than 15. Hat pulled low, but eyes cold as a January dawn. The boy's message. He didn't raise his gun. He just tossed a small metal cylinder at Josie's feet as he thundered past. It rolled once and hissed, releasing a wisp of green smoke. When it cleared, Josie saw it was a shell casing. Inside was a scrap of paper. In block letters, it read, "Put the ledger back or the next bullet is for Joaquín." Josie crumpled the note and shoved it into her pocket. "Guess he knows we've got it," Joaquín said grimly. "Good," Josie said, spurring her horse forward. "Let's see how fast we can make him come and get it. Chapter 9. A Deal with the Devil in Bisbee. Bisbee was a mining town that never slept. Not because the ore was flowing, but because trouble didn't own a clock. By the time Josie, Joaquin, and Clarabelle rode in under the pale glow of the moon, the place was alive with drunken laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint, dangerous hum of men carrying grudges. They weren't there for the whiskey or the gambling. They were there for one man, Silas the Devil McGraw, the devil's reputation. Silas McGraw was the kind of man who could get you a train ticket to anywhere in the country and make sure the sheriff never asked why you were leaving in such a hurry. He'd been accused of everything from cattle rustling to bank robbery to selling information straight to the Apache scouts, and yet he'd never spent a night in a jail cell. Some said he was too slippery. Others said the devil didn't get caught because he owned the very law that might catch him. Josie didn't care about his politics. She needed his information. The saloon entrance. They found him in the Silver A Saloon, a place thick with cigar smoke and bad intentions. The piano player didn't look up when they walked in, but the crowd did, dusty from the trail, carrying the kind of expression that said they weren't here for the music. At the far end, Silas sat at a poker table, red waistcoat crisp, hat tipped low. His smile was the slow kind, the kind that crept across his face like it was sneaking up on you. "Well now," Silas drawled, shuffling a deck with one hand, "ain't every day the famous Josie Willowhawk graces my table." The proposition. Josie didn't waste time. "I need a name," she said, standing over him. "You've got to pay for names in this town," Silas replied, dealing cards to himself. "And around here the currency's risk." "What kind of risk?" Josie asked. Silas slid a chair toward her with the toe of his boot. "One hand of poker. Winner gets what they came for. Loser," he glanced at Joaquin and Clarabelle, "loser leaves someone behind." The stakes. Josie's got twisted. She didn't trust the devil's smile, but she also knew walking away would mean losing her only lead. "Fine," she said, dropping into the chair. "One hand." Joaquin muttered something in Spanish under his breath, probably a prayer. Silas dealt the cards, his eyes never leaving hers. Around them, the saloon quieted, as if the whole town wanted to hear the sound of Josie winning or losing. The play. Josie lifted her cards. 2 queens. Not bad, but not unbeatable. Silas's face was unreadable. He tossed in a gold coin. "Your turn." Josie pushed in a small leather pouch, her last stash of silver. Silas raised the stakes with a smirk. "Add the ledger." The saloon's air thickened instantly. Josie kept her voice cool. "Ledger's not on the table." "Then maybe your friend there?" Silas's gaze slid toward Clarabelle. The bluff. Josie smiled, the slow, dangerous kind that said she was more than she looked. "I'll tell you what, Silas. You win, you can keep your secrets. But if I win," she leaned in, "you not only give me the name, you tell me where to find him." The devil's grin widened. "Now it's interesting." They threw in the final bets. Cards hit the table. Silas revealed 3 8s. Strong hand. Josie flipped hers. A straight flush. The saloon erupted. "The name." Silas's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed just enough to let her know she'd gotten under his skin. "You're looking for a man who calls himself Ash. That his real name?" Josie asked. "No," Silas said, leaning back. "But it's the one you'll hear whispered in the camps. He's the man with no shadows left hand. And if you find Ash," he tilted his head, "you'll be one step closer to your ghost." The warning. As Josie stood to leave, Silas caught her wrist. His grip was iron. "One more thing, cowgirl. That ledger you're carrying? Burn it. If Ash gets wind you've got it, it won't be Joaquin or your widow friend in the dirt. It'll be you." Josie pulled free, eyes locked on his. "He can try." The night ride. They rode out of Bisbee under the cover of darkness, the sound of the saloon still echoing in their ears. The name Ash rolled around Josie's mind like a snake coil in waiting. She didn't know yet whether finding him would get her answers or her grave. Either way, she aimed to find out. Chapter 10. The Ambush at Rattlesnake Pass. The morning air in the Arizona Territory was cold enough to bite, the kind that made your breath look like ghost smoke. Josie, Joaquín, and Clarabelle had been riding since before dawn, the trail winding tighter and tighter as they closed in on Rattlesnake Pass, a narrow cut between two cliffs where the wind whistled like a warning. They weren't alone. The uneasy ride. Joaquín rode point, his eyes scanning the rocky ridges above. Clarabelle stayed close to Josie, clutching the reins like the saddle might buck her off at any moment. "You sure this Ash fella's going to be here?" Joaquín muttered. Josie adjusted her hat. If Silas wasn't lying, this is the only way he'd come through to reach the Yuma Trail. "That's a mighty big if," Clarabelle said, her voice low. "You trust the devil?" "I trust that he likes to brag," Josie replied. "Men like that can't help but be right about something at least once." The first sign, half a mile from the pass, Josie's horse flicked its ears forward. Something was wrong. The silence hit her next. No bird calls. No wind through the scrub. Just stillness. Then she saw it. A glint of metal high on the ridge. "Down!" Josie shouted. A rifle cracked. A bullet tore into the dirt where her boot had been. The trap? They dove for cover behind a cluster of rocks. Joaquín returned fire, the echo of his shots bouncing off the canyon walls. Dust rained down from above as more bullets chewed into the stone. "Looks like someone's expecting us," Joaquín growled. Josie peeked over the rock and saw them. 6 riders, positioned on both sides of the pass, rifles trained like they were at a turkey shoot. And at the center, sitting calm as a preacher on Sunday, was a man dressed in black from head to toe, face hidden under the shadow of his hat. "Ash!" The conversation. Ash didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried, smooth as river water. "Josie Willowhawk, I hear you've been asking about me." Josie stepped into view, hands away from her guns. "I like to get to know the people who try to kill me." Ash chuckled, slow and dry. "That ledger you've got? It belongs to someone who wants it back real bad. And I'm here to collect." "You'll have to take it off me," Josie said. "That's the plan," Ash replied. The shift. Before Josie could blink, Clarabelle stood up beside her. "I know you," Clarabelle called out. "You work for my husband." Ash tilted his head. "Marshall's widow," he said like a greeting. "You've been keeping bad company." Clarabelle's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "And you've been killing good men." The air thickened. Josie realized this wasn't just a job for Ash. It was personal, which meant she could use that. The bluff. Josie grinned. "Funny thing, Ash, I already sent copies of that ledger to a few friends up north. If I don't make out of here, your boss is going to have himself a whole mess of new enemies." Ash's jaw tightened. His men shifted uneasily. He might not believe her, but he couldn't risk calling her bluff. "Let them pass," he ordered. One of his men protested. "But—" Ash cut him off. "I said let them pass." The pass. They rode through under the watch of 6 rifles. Josie kept her eyes locked on Ash the whole way. He didn't move, didn't smile, just watched them ride out of range. When they were finally clear, Joaquín spat into the dirt. "You just made yourself a powerful enemy." Josie shook her head. "No, I just made myself a deadline. He's not letting this go." The realization. As they camped that night, Josie opened her saddlebag to check the ledger and froze. It was gone. A single playing card sat in its place. The ace of spades, black as night. Ash hadn't let them pass. He'd just let them think they had. Chapter 11. The poker game at dawn. The desert night bled into a pale, chilly dawn, the kind that made the horizon look like it had been painted in soft pastels just to lull folks into thinking the day would be kind. Josie knew better. She sat cross-legged by the campfire, sharpening her knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Joaquín paced like a caged panther, muttering about fool's plans and suicide with style. Clarabelle just sat staring at the ace of spades, turning it over in her fingers like it might start talking. The invitation. They weren't supposed to hear the hoofbeats, but they did. 3 riders approached the camp, all dressed in gray dusters. The one in the middle tossed something small toward Josie. It landed in the dirt with a soft thud. A poker chip, black, embossed with a spade. The rider spoke in a low, even tone. "Ash says you're invited. Rattlesnake Gulch. First light. Joaquín swore. That's 2 miles from here and in the middle of his territory. Josie smirked. Guess I better bring my lucky hat. The Gulch. Rattlesnake Gulch wasn't a place you stumbled into by accident. The rocks formed a natural amphitheater, high walls on all sides, and a single flat space at the bottom where a table had been set up, a poker table. Ash was already there, seated with the same calm posture as before, black hat tilted low. The ledger, her ledger, sat in the middle of the table like the pot in the world's most dangerous game. Josie Willowhawk, Ash said, his voice smooth as whiskey. Care to play for what's yours? Josie slid into the chair opposite him. I'm guessing no is an option? You guess right. The rules? Ash dealt 5 cards each. No extra players. No audience of the ridges above, where his men watch with rifles ready. 1 hand, Ash said. Winner takes the ledger. Loser walks away if she can. Josie eyed him. And if I win, I get more than the ledger. You tell me who you're working for. Ash hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but if I win, you stop asking questions. Deal. The game. Josie looked at her cards. Pair of 8s. Nothing fancy. She kept her face blank. Ash's eyes flicked over his hand, unreadable. He tossed 2 cards and drew 2 more. Josie tossed 1, drew 1. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had stopped. They traded small bets, not with chips, but with promises. Josie promised to give up a lead on stolen silver if she lost a round. Ash promised safe passage for Joaquín and Clarabelle. By the final bet, Josie had nothing left but her pride, and a feeling Ash was holding back. The reveal. Ash laid down his cards. Full house. Queens over jacks. Josie smiled, then laid hers down. 4 8s. The ridges erupted with shouts. Ash didn't move, didn't curse. Just stared at her cards like they crawled out of the desert dust. You cheat? He asked quietly. No, Josie said. I just know how to read a man who thinks he's already won. The truth, Ash pushed the ledger toward her. Your win, but your curiosity's going to kill you. You promised me a name. Josie reminded him. Ash leaned in, voice low. You're looking for a man who calls himself the Vulture. He runs half the territory, and if he wants you dead, you'll wish I'd pulled the trigger instead. Josie's blood ran cold. She'd heard the name, but never from someone who'd lived to tell it. The departure. They rode out with the ledger, the sun finally breaking over the canyon rim. Joaquín rode alongside her. You gonna tell me who this Vulture is? He asked. Josie shook her head. Not yet, but we're headed straight for his nest. Clarabelle crossed herself. Lord help us. From behind them, on the ridge, Ash watched them go. And this time he smiled. Chapter 12. The Vulture's Nest. The desert didn't just get hotter. As the day wore on, it got heavier, like the air itself knew what was about to happen and wanted to smother it before it started. Josie Willowhawk had seen plenty of trouble in her life, but this was the kind of trouble that made you write a letter to your own ghost. The ledger was tucked into her saddlebag, its weight digging into her horse's side with every step. Joaquín rode beside her, quiet for once. Clarabelle followed close behind, whispering a prayer that probably had clauses, amendments, and escape routes built into it. The Vulture's territory. The Vulture didn't live in a town. He owned a town. It didn't have a name folks use anymore, not since he'd taken it over and turned it into a halfway house for killers, thieves, and men who liked to drink before they brushed their teeth. The first sign they were close was the buzzards, the real ones circling high above. Then came the smell, wood smoke, whiskey, and something far worse. You sure about this? Joaquín asked. No, Josie said. But he sent Ash after me. That means he's scared. And if he's scared, I've got leverage. The nest itself. The main street looked like it had been built from stolen pieces of other towns. Buildings leaned like they were tired of standing. A saloon with broken shutters sat across from a jail that looked like it was more about keeping people out. At the far end of the street was the biggest building of them all, 3 stories tall, painted black, with a balcony running its length. And there, leaning on the railing like a man with all the time in the world, was the Vulture. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a coat lined with raven feathers. His smile was too wide for his face. "Miss Willowhawk," he called down. "I hear you've been looking for me." The offer. They met in his office, a room lined with maps, ledgers, and a wall full of rifles. He poured whiskey for himself, none for her. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble," the vulture said, swirling his drink. "But I like a woman with initiative. So I'll make you a deal. You work for me, and I'll make you richer than you can count." Josie leaned forward. "And if I say no?" The vulture's smile didn't fade. "Then I feed you to the men you made enemies of. Alive." The double cross. Josie nodded slowly, then reached into her saddlebag. She set the ledger on his desk, opening it to a page that wasn't just numbers. It was names. The vulture's allies, his bribes, his weak spots. "See," she said, "I didn't just come for the ledger. I came to make sure everyone knows what's in it." The vulture's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." Before he could stand, Joaquín burst through the door with Clarabelle behind him, rifles drawn. The shootout. The first shot shattered the whiskey bottle. The second took down the man guarding the hall. Bullets tore through the office windows as the vulture's men scrambled to get a clear shot. Josie ducked behind the desk, firing at shadows. Joaquín, grinning like a man who'd missed this kind of trouble, covered the door. When the smoke cleared, half the building was on fire and the vulture was gone. The chase. They found him on the balcony, leaping onto a black stallion. Josie sprinted after him, swinging into her own saddle. The chase tore through the burning town, past the saloon, past the church, and out into the desert. He was fast, but Josie was faster. She drew alongside him, grabbed his coat, and yanked. The vulture hit the ground hard, dust exploding around him. The final word. Josie stood over him, gun drawn. "You think you've killed me," the vulture rasped, "but I've got men everywhere. They'll come for you." Josie smiled coldly. "Let him. I'll be waiting." She turned, mounted up, and rode back toward the burning town, toward whatever future was left for a giant Apache cowgirl who'd married 4 men in one day, stolen from the most dangerous man in the territory, and lived to tell the tale. Some folks would call her lucky. Others would call her cursed. Josie just called herself free. The end. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on the notification button as we bring you another epic story from the West.